I won't discuss things like exploration, lore, story, the immersive hunting experience, the speedrunning experience, or any of that other crap. I won't even say much about the so-called meta,
but I will. The split between weapon and armor skills is inherently interesting. Unfortunately, the execution on it isn't. Critical Boost is the only skill that applies as a post modifier, meaning it scales every single source of raw. This means that every other skill competing for weapon deco slot needs to do all that much more lifting in order to be considered worthwhile. One such skill is Power Prolonger on Switch Axe, as it significantly increases amp duration, leading to an overall smoother gameplay experience and better overall damage output. On top of this, many element skills are now also exclusive to weapons, meaning element overall got super nerfed. It is clear that there was an attempt at nerfing the insanely strong crit meta that developed over the last few games, in an attempt to push one of Wilds' gimmicks, being weapon swaps. Crit boost being on weapon, however, makes zero sense, as there aren't any weapons that actively dislike having it or would be hindered by it. Sharpness and sharpness related skills, skill tags like Rapid Morph, Power Prolonger, Offensive Guard and such, I believe belong on weapons rather than armor. Element attacks also kind of make sense to have there. Crit boost and critical element, however, do not. An example of a good new skill is White Flame Torrent, which was put on weapons with otherwise good to great stat lines too, and only on those. Functionally, using Zoe weapons means giving up something else. Most easily crit boost, and some weapons choose to do so. Unfortunately, it is functionally extremely similar to the blast status. Moving and eliminating a lot of skills by making them compete for different slots freed up the armor side of things. Where before we used to use skills such as Weakness Exploit, Agitator, Maximite, Bloodlust and Burst, we now instead use Weakness Exploit, Agitator, Maximite and 2-piece Gore, which is functionally Bloodlust, and Burst. There aren't many, but some interesting newcomers. Alongside them, however, most of the old staples such as Peak Performance, as well as some newer skills like Adrenaline Rush, got nerfed into near unusability. In their place, we have skills like Counter-Strike, which activates if you would have taken big enough knockback, ignoring whether or not you actually do. While the Counter-Strike buff serves as a replacement for former staple skills, the rest of that list does not look as happy. Peak Performance got nerfed heavily, competing for what precious few level 2 decorations are available, with no easy way to maintain it as health augment does not exist. Competing with Counter-Strike, which has an incredibly easy activation condition, lasts for a respectable amount of time and provides 25 attack for just 3 level 2 slots, or via charm. Peak meanwhile caps out at plus 20 raw at 5 level 2 slots invested, with a much harder maintenance. Adrenaline Rush got bumped to level 3, of which there are even fewer available slots, and even harsher competition in Wax and Agitator. Unlike Peak, it can perform as a 1-point wonder, being its most efficient at level 1 for 10 raw. The Wiggler team was originally formed to lay out guides in a uniform fashion, make them readable and understandable by laypeople, in an ongoing effort to move against misinformation. It is a core belief that a lot of complaining regarding Sunbreak's endgame against roided out anomaly monsters stems from the inflated HP pools, which perfectly line up against the high power optimized sets, but don't treat unoptimized gimmick sets nicely. Arguing against bad sets published and referenced to us regularly helps people understand why HP was as bloated as it was, and helped understand that they weren't actually that bloated. One of the greatest sharers of misinformation is without a doubt Capcom. Even 2 months after release, skills have made up descriptions of what they do. Take Antivirus, which still states that it increases affinity by 15% after curing Frenzy. It should be 10. Power Prolonger states that it boosts the duration of weapon power-ups moderately at level 1. Level 2 just says it boosts, and level 3 describes the duration as greatly boosted. AMP has a base duration of 45 seconds, which becomes 60, 75 and 90 seconds respectively. Does this mean moderate is 15 or 33%? Does greatly mean plus 45 or doubled? Counter-Strike says it boosts duration at level 2 and 3 moderately, and extends respectively. Evade Window, Gormagala's Tyranny or Black Eclipse, Burst, Heartbreaker Flayer, just to name a few, have very information-absent descriptions. Skills like Weakness Exploit, Agitator, Peak Performance, Resentment Stamina Surge, and Heroics are a perfect example of how descriptions should be handled, but often aren't. And all of that is without going into skills just being bad by design. Scorcher, White Flame, Convert Element, Flayer. Scorcher 1 deals 30 fire damage that scales with fire hit zone in effectively random, not really random intervals. Scorcher 2 deals 100 fire damage that scales with fire hit zone. If Capcom genuinely believes that this is a worthwhile payoff for investing 4 otherwise mediocre armor pieces, the disconnect between how their own math works and plays out, and their own understanding of it is insurmountable. This is generally in line with the sheer competence they displayed with Wilds in a lot of different places, but that's a story for another time. Notably, Scorcher scales, at the time of writing, with anything that buffs fire or all elements. White Flame functionally behaves like Blast, but functions on a different activation mechanism than Scorcher, which is important as White Flame overrides Scorcher's original activation timings with its own. It procs for 50 flat, unscalable damage. Scorcher and White Flame stack. Scorcher 1 and White Flame will proc for 30 scalable, hit zone dependent fire damage and 60 flat, unscalable damage. Scorcher 2 and White Flame will proc for 80 flat, unscalable damage, and instead of 100 will only deal 80 fire. Somehow, that investment of 4 whole mediocre armor pieces translates to about 80 damage and 80 fire every give or take 6 to 7 seconds. While 30, 80 and 100 sound like pretty good numbers, mind that they scale with hit zone, and elemental hit zones are typically very low. Take Magala for example, where its head is a 15 fire hit zone. This means that those 30, 80 and 100 fire mentioned earlier now translate to 4.5, 12 and 15 damage respectively. This is nowhere near enough to compete with even a singular maxed out staple skill. Convert Element slightly buffs Dragon Element present on weapons. It gets activated when you receive any amount of elemental damage, lasts for 120 seconds when it does, and has a 90-second cooldown period. The bigger draw to this skill is not the elemental boost it provides. It's the yet another flavor of Blast. The procs it produces are strong, and their frequency scales with raw and crit, and will only ever proc if you deal any elemental damage at all. It is partially true damage with a tiny amount of Dragon. Functionally, this is a mix of the Scorcher and White Flame interaction, but Dragon flavored, and behaves like Blast, in the sense that every monster has a threshold that needs to be overcome, increases after it's been met, and maxes out after a few applications, exactly like status would. This Dragon part of the damage procs, however, at the time of writing, does not scale with anything other than hit zone. Why? Flayer increases wound damage, as in it buffs how fast wounds appear. Additionally, it deals flat, unscalable damage occasionally. At the time of writing, as it is confirmed to work as intended, it cannot proc its damage if the part you are attacking is unable to generate a wound at the time of hitting. Yet again, another Blast clone. While pretty good on paper, after a lot of testing, it does provide just above 0.5% of the total DPS on my hunts. All those skills have fundamentally good ideas, but terrible execution that render them borderline unusably weak in the face of 4-piece gore and the sheer efficiency of Sochia chest. The final nail in the coffin is the lack of direction when it comes to set design. My favorite example is Ajara Khan's set, which provides 5 points of Part Breaker. 5 points of Part Breaker. A skill that maxes out at level 3. I've heard that complaint dismissed by stating that Capcom probably intended to incentivize making mixed sets. But then why are they also empathizing 4-piece set boni, which by definition require hard committing to the same set? Set building in Wilds is insanely streamlined, with little to no variety, and every potentially interesting gameplay or matchup changing skill is so violently undertuned that it was dead on arrival. To recap, crit got nerfed, but so did everything else, making crit arguably as strong, if not stronger, than ever. Certain skills got completely obliterated in terms of viability, like Bludgeoner, which used to be a staple in base games in Generation 5, because almost every weapon choice gets Giga Sharpness now. Set bony are dominating, very akin to Iceborne. Weapon selection is tiny, there is one exhaust file, and many elements only have one option for them. Most weapons got gigantic boosts in MV, meaning set building decisions matter much less as monster HP just isn't there to punish bad sets yet.